Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to step into a wet, shivering corner of history, where the air smells like damp leather and unwashed socks. And the only thing thinner than your cloak is your chance of survival. It's 1415. The mist is so thick it feels like it's leaning on your shoulders. You're camped beneath skeletal trees with English soldiers huddled in fear, cold, and filth. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan to some soothing background music, and enjoy your evening ride together. You're lying on wet leaves, and the ground smells like rot. Dew collects on your lashes before the sun even bothers rising. Your boots are soaked through, and you haven't eaten since, honestly, you can't remember. All around you, groaning men shift under ragged blankets. The forest isn't just cold, it's suspiciously quiet, and that's when you hear it. A cough, a groan, the hiss of wind through damped trees. And then, the nervous creak of a bowstring being tested. This isn't the battle yet. It's the day before the stage being quietly set for one of the strangest, bloodiest, most lopsided victories in military history. The Battle of Agincourt isn't just about knights and arrows. It's about rain. It's about how a stupid, muddy field can decide the future of kingdoms. The English army, led by King Henry V, shouldn't even be here. They're outnumbered, sick, starving. And to top it off, they're trapped between a thick French forest and thousands of angry French nobles, wearing enough steel to sink a barge. The French army is massive, maybe 20,000 or more. The English, somewhere around 6,000. But those 6,000 brought longbows. And longbows don't care how shiny your armor is. You shift beside a Welsh archer who smells like onions and death. He has no teeth, but he does have a bow as tall as you are, and he's polishing his arrows with chicken fat. For luck, he says. You decide not to ask questions. Behind you, King Henry is pacing. He's only 28 years old, and a case of dysentery has made his cheeks hollow. But he's dressed in polished plate, gold crown nestled above his brow, and eyes. Like flint, the men call him Harry behind his back. He hears them, and doesn't seem to mind. You wouldn't expect this man to be your best hope, but here we are. Here's what's strange. Despite all odds, no one's running. Henry delivered a speech last night, not the Shakespeare one, not yet but one, that made the men believe. Or maybe it was the fact that there was nowhere else to go. The only way home is through the French. Some argue they expected Henry to surrender. Others think they were overconfident and disorganized, like kids showing up to a chess match with Nerf swords. But what is clear is this. The battlefield they chose was a long, narrow strip of open farmland flanked by woods, great for farming, terrible for fighting, especially with 40 kilos of steel strapped to your chest. And then came the rain. It didn't just rain, it poured all night. The field turned to soup. Horses would struggle. Just to stand upright, men would sink ankle-deep into muck with every step. You, of course, have already lost your footing twice, just trying to pee behind a bush. But here's the thing about longbowmen. They don't need to charge. They can wait. You glance again at your onion-smelling friend. He's humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like London Bridge and tying bits of linen around his fingers. For a grip, he mutters, the sun rises. Or tries to. It's a greasy yellow orb behind a curtain of mist. You hear the drums before you see the French. It's not a charge, it's a procession. Banners flutter, trumpets squawk, and then emerge. The French nobility, tall on horseback, glittering like walking chandeliers. They look magnificent. They look doomed. Because what they don't realize, what you're starting to, is that no amount of silk and steel can stop an arrow traveling. At 150 miles per hour, Henry steps forward. No fanfare, no theatrics. Just a glance toward the archers. And, like dancers at a grim, muddy ballet, they move into formation. Behind makeshift wooden stakes planted at angles, rows upon rows of longbowmen pull their strings taut. Over 5,000. Of them, no armor, no shields, just calloused fingers and years of back-breaking training. This is not just an army. It's a wall of tension. You take one last breath and hold it, because somewhere out there, on that churned-up farmland, a horn will sound, and all this cold, all this silence. All this mud is about to become legend, but for now, you wait. And in that quiet, the weight of the moment presses down like fog. Your feet are wet, your stomach growls, and every sense in your body tells you that tomorrow may not come. Still, you do not run because you are English, or at least pretending to be, and today, history is watching. The horn doesn't sound right away. That's the frustrating part. The waiting, you're braced, fingers clenched around your bow, your spear, or just your knees end, then nothing happens. The French aren't moving, they're just standing there, polishing armor, adjusting feathers, waving their fancy banners around like this is a birthday party and not a bloodbath. King Henry knows this game. He's read the rumor in this case. The soggy farmland and decides to play. The unexpected move, he commands the English army to advance. Wait, advance? Yes, across open ground with no cavalry shield, with no fortifications, just a line of archers and weary men-at-arms dragging their feet through pudding-thick mud. Historians are still debating whether this was genius or madness, maybe both. Henry knows that the longer they wait, the worse their position becomes. Food is low, morale's dropping, and the French might finally get their mess together. So, he closes the gap. You followed the shuffle forward. It's silent, no chance. No drums, just the squelch of boots and the occasional muttered curse when someone trips in a rut at the front. Henry carries the royal banner. The wind is barely enough to lift it. You notice the younger soldiers glancing at it like it's a holy relic. The older ones, they just try not to fall over. Let's take a moment here to talk about the man leading this pitiful, mud-splattered procession. Henry V wasn't supposed to be this person. A decade earlier, he was the teenage hellraiser known as Prince Haltivern, brawler, moonlighter in seedy pubs, more interested in dice than destiny. His father, Henry IV, spent half his reign trying not to get overthrown, and the other half glaring at his son's hangovers. But when the crown landed on Henry's head, in 1413, it was like he swallowed a history book and turned into a living sermon. He shaved his party beard, embraced religion with terrifying intensity, and decided that his destiny lay not in London, but across the Channel in France. Technically, Henry had a claim. Through his great-grandfather, Edward III, he had a legal right to the French throne. French lawyers disagreed. French kings laughed. French nobles rolled their eyes, so Henry raised an army and set sail anyway. The original plan, easy take Harfleur, grab some land, maybe secure a treaty, and head home with glory tucked under one arm. But Harfleur didn't fall easy. It took over a month of brutal siege. Disease broke out. Dysentery spread like gossip in a medieval tavern. Men were literally dying on the latrines. It got so bad, Henry had to send thousands of his own soldiers home just to keep the army from collapsing into a sick puddle of regret. When Harfleur finally surrendered, Henry was left with a fraction of his force. He could have stayed put, fortified the town, written a polite letter to the French king saying, "Let's try again next year." But that wasn't Henry's style. Instead, he decided to march across enemy territory to Calais, a bold symbolic gesture that said, "I'm not running, I'm just walking assertively in the opposite direction." And that's how we ended up here, in this mud, in this mist, in front of a French army that should win this battle just by showing up back on the field. The French are finally moving. No, it's more like a slow-motion parade of overconfidence. They're still organizing into their 3 battle lines, still arguing over who gets to fight in the front ranks, because apparently French nobility is allergic to humility. Snippets from your onion-breathed friend again. Too many helmets, not enough brains. He's not wrong. Some of the French nobles had even paid to be at the front, like it was a VIP concert, and the band was fate. You look over and see King Charles VI's banner fluttering faintly in the distance. But Charles isn't here. He's back in Paris, caught in one of his spells. Charles VI, also known as Charles the Mad, once thought he was made of glass. He'd have guards walk beside him so he wouldn't shatter. Nice guy, probably not ideal for wartime leadership. So, instead of the king, the French command is a committee of dukes, which, as anyone who's been to a meeting about anything knows, is the fastest way to accomplish absolutely nothing. Still, the numbers favor them. Heavily dot, the French have heavy cavalry armored war horses, the size of small cottages, crossbowmen, Pikemen, men at arms with so many plumes they could pass for roosters, but they also have that field, that cursed, narrow field recently blessed with an entire night of rain and just wide enough for disaster. You brace again. The English army has dug sharpened stakes into the earth to stop cavalry. You're in the middle, archers on either side like wings of a paper bird. And just before the first French wave moves, Henry does something strange. He rides out in front of the army. No grand speech, no theatrics, just a few words, calm, clear, and deeply unsettling. "You have come here to fight," he says. "If you die with honor. And if you live, then let your victory speak for itself." Then he takes off his crown. Yes, really. He removes his actual golden crown, hands it to a squire, and says, "Keep this safe, because either he wins today, or no one will be left to care." And as the crown disappears into the shadows, you hear, "It at last, the first thunder of hooves. The French have decided, it begins." The sound starts like distant thunder, but it isn't thunder. It's the ground-shaking, grumbling, protesting under the charge of several hundred horses moving. Like a tidal wave toward your position, you're standing behind the wooden stakes, hammered deep into the muck. And those pointed tips suddenly feel like the most trustworthy friends you've ever had. The French vanguard is coming fast too fast. They're galloping through a funnel of trees and farmland narrowed by the forest, churning mud with every hoofbeat. The lead knights are shouting in French, but the words are lost in the roar of metal and muscle. You clench your jaw, not because you're brave, but because your teeth are chattering. This isn't fear. It's cold and, okay, maybe a little fear. You're about to witness what happens when a medieval wall of horsepower hits a medieval wall of physics. Then, before they get close enough to swing a sword, the archers let fly. It's not one shot, it's a storm. Thousands of arrows streak across the sky, hissing like angry wasps. They fall in elegant arcs, black streaks against the gray mist and rain down on the charging cavalry with a thudding, rhythmic violence. This isn't like the movies. There's no dramatic music, just the sickening crunch of arrows hitting wood, armor, flesh. You see a French knight take one through the horse's eye. The beast screams and topples forward, sending its rider flying. Another arrow punches through the slit in a vis-a-pure chance, pure horror. The horses flail in the mud, tripping over each other, slipping on churned ground already thick with the blood of the unlucky. Historians are still debating whether the English archers used bodkin points or broadheads here bodkins for piercing armor. Broadheads for unarmored targets, probably both. One fact is clear. They worked. The first wave of French cavalry doesn't reach you. They collapse in front of the English line, tangled in their own panic, stuck in the mud, peppered by arrows. The few who stagger to their feet are cut down. By waiting men at arms with poleaxes and short swords, it's hard to watch. These aren't monsters, they're sons, husbands, some just boys wearing family crests. Their armor is supposed to protect them, not drown them. But this is war, and Henry knows it's not enough to survive. He has to break their spirit. So, as the second French wave approaches infantry this time, weighted down by chainmail and archers loose again. These soldiers fare no better. The muddy field turns into a trap. The narrow frontage, flanked by woods, means only a few men can attack at once. The rest just wait their turn to die. You're shoved forward as Englishmen counterattack, and suddenly you're in it. The noise, the stink, the crush. You can't see more than a few feet in any direction. Just armor glinting in the morning light, and the shocked faces of men who thought this would be easy. It's not a battle anymore. It's a brawl in a swamp. And here's the strange detail. Some French knights actually drown in their own armor. Not metaphorically, literally, pushed to the ground, face first, unable to rise under the weight of steel and mud. You glimpse one noble clawing at his helmet, eyes wide behind the visor, before the earth swallows him. This isn't honor. This isn't glory. This is Agincourt, and it's a slaughter. Still, more French keep coming, driven by pride or rage or simple confusion. They press into the killing field, piling onto their own dead. Some are trampled by their allies. Some throw down weapons and beg. Henry's lines hold just barely. And then comes a turning point that even his closest men don't understand. He orders the execution of the prisoners. You blink, That can't be right, but it is. Hundreds of French nobles, captured and bound, are marched behind the line's end then. Cut down, it's a brutal, almost unthinkable act, and historians still argue over why he did it. Some say he feared a second French attack and didn't want prisoners rising behind his lines. Others say it was Raja moment of royal fury. Either way it happened, and it's one of the darker shadows hanging over Henry's otherwise legendary victory. The archers, many of whom are poor farmers and former criminals, hesitate. Killing prisoners is dishonorable, but orders are orders. Some refuse, others obey duly, stand there, frozen. As the cheering slows and the air grows heavy, the field is quiet again, but only because so many voices are gone. You step over bodies, the mud squelches underfoot. Someone hands you water. It tastes like iron dot, and in the middle of it all stands King Henry, visor lifted, face unreadable, no smile, no fist raised in triumph. Just a slow look around, like he's counting the cost. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't supposed to be a massacre. But war rarely listens to the plans of kings. You find a place to sit, back against a ruined cart, and stare at the sky now clearing slightly, letting a bit of sun sneak through. Survived somehow. But you already know that sleep tonight will not come easy, not after what you've seen. You're not sure how long you've been sitting, their legs trembling. Head foggy, but the stench of churned up mud and blood never leaves. The battlefield is no longer a place of movement, it's a grave. The morning mist has lifted now, revealing the full, horrifying canvas. Plate armor glints in soft sunlight, half submerged in thick clay. Banners are torn, lances snapped, horses collapsed mid-stride. Everything is motionless, except for the slow trickle of steam rising from 100 cooling corpses. This was supposed to be a display of French dominance. Instead, it's a lesson in overconfidence. Welcome to the killing field. The terrain, in the end, did more damage than the swords. Narrow, muddy, and flanked by woods, it had funneled the entire French army into a place they couldn't escape. Knights, so proud in their gleaming armor, had slipped like toddlers on ice. Horses panicked. Units collapsed on top of each other. It wasn't a battle. It was a pileup hand. You were lucky to be on the dry side of it. One of the oddest details. Many French nobles wore identifying badges sewn into their clothing beneath their armor. You know, in case they were captured and needed to be ransomed, it was the medieval version of carrying VIP tickets. But here, in this quagmire, those badges became useless. You step around the body of a French Duc Hisdebard, still intact, proudly displaying his family coat of arms. You can't read it, but you can see the blood drying along its edge. There's no dignity in the way he fell, half buried in mud, legs bent unnaturally, a broken sword still clutched in one hand, like he was trying to stab fate. And here's the thing about this moment. No one is cheering. Not really. Not even the archers, who arguably just earned their pay for the next 5 centuries. Victory is heavy, and it's loud in the silence that follows. You pass a small group of longbowmen mud-caked, hollow-eyed, too tired to talk. One is plucking broken arrows from corpses and muttering, "Don't waste good wood." You make a mental note never to sit too close to him at dinner, and then you see them. The prisoners. Not all were killed when Henry gave the order. A few were spared, those too valuable, too highborn to be casually executed. They're sitting in a makeshift pen, hands bound, their eyes darting across the carnage with quiet royal confusion. One of them coughs, then laughs softly. It's not joy, it's disbelief. You're reminded that these were not just men in armor. They were fathers, sons, some barely more than teenagers, wearing their father's greaves. They thought they were immortal, and today they learned that field doesn't care about your lineage. Let's rewind for a second and ask, how did it come to this? How did one of the richest, most prestigious armies in Europe get reduced to a muddy ruin? Historians agree on some things: French overconfidence, poor coordination, and disastrously bad tactical decisions. They didn't wait for all their troops to arrive. They underestimated the English. They believed sheer numbers would carry the day. And then they marched into a bottleneck in armor that turned rivers into coffins. But what doesn't get enough credit? Henry's preparation. You might think the longbow won the day, and sure, it was vital. But Henry was more than just lucky. He placed the stakes to stop cavalry. He chose his ground carefully. He gave speeches that hardened hearts, He made his men believe, even in the rain, even in the muck, and, like it or not, he made ruthless decisions. Remember, those prisoners executed. Behind the lines, that wasn't just fear, that was calculation. The French third wave was approaching when he gave the order. He thought, if those knights rise up poor, if their friends try to free them, we're done. So he acted fast, brutal, and probably necessary. Still debated, though some historians argue it was a war crime. Others defend it as strategic necessity. But here's the quiet truth you feel in your bones. Every great military victory lives in a shadow, and today, you're standing right in it. Henry appears again flanked by a small retinue. His armor is filthy, his face drawn, but his crown is back in place. He walks the field, not as a conqueror, but as someone inspecting the aftermath of a storm. You catch a brief exchange between him and one of his captains. How many fallen? The answer, too many to count. But they're French. Henry nods slowly. So are we, in part. A strange comment. You wonder if he means lineage or guilt. It gets weirder. After the battle, Henry had a cross erected on the field to thank God for victory. Not to honor the dead, not even to celebrate the English, but to thank God, as if he himself wasn't sure how it all worked out. You find a log to sit on, near what was once the French front line. There's a broken shield at your feet. You pick it up. It's heavier than it looks. Just holding it makes your arms ache. It's quiet now, save for the wind brushing the treetops and the occasional clatter of salvage work. Some men are digging shallow graves. Others are looting, because war doesn't come with a cleanup crew. The jokes return quietly. A bowman beside you lifts a French helmet and says, well, at least their heads finally matched their egos. You chuckle. It's dark humor, but it gets you through the afternoon. You look down the field again, at the slope where the arrows fell, at the churned-up earth that swallowed an army, at the silence that remains, and you wonder what stories will be told about this day. Will they mention the mud, the fear, the drowned men gasping behind visors, or just the glory? By the time you crawl into what passes for a bed, really just a rolled-up cloak and a patch of drier-than-average dirt, the sun is already low. The field behind you is still being sorted. Men are stacking weapons, counting arrows, looting boots. Yes, boots, because in 1415, if you wanted a new pair, you didn't go shopping. You went scavenging. You close your eyes for a second and see them again, the arrows. The knights, the look on that French noble's face, right before he vanished into the mud. Like a poorly planned magic trick, you're exhausted. And yet, sleep won't come. Your ears still ring from the noise. Your hands won't stop shaking. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're aware that this moment, this muddy, breathless silence will one day be described as glorious. But right now, it just feels like survival. And then, just before darkness finishes swallowing the horizon, the king calls a meeting. Of course he does. You trudge toward the makeshift command post, just a cluster of tents surrounded by guards too tired to raise their spears properly. There's hot wine being passed around, and you take a sip that scorches your throat and warms your toes at the same time. First thing all day that's gone, right? Henry V stands in the center, still in armor, though the crown's back on his head now. It's streaked with blood, not his end. You realize uneasily that he hasn't taken it off since the battle ended. He begins speaking, and his voice is quiet. Too quiet for a king who just won one of the most famous victories in English history. Is no victory without cost, he says. We have won the day, but not the war. And for those who gave their lives here, remember them not as banners or names, but as men. You glance at the others. Some nod, some cry. One guy just falls asleep. Standing up, fair enough, the mood is strange. This should be the part where someone cheers, right? Where they sing songs and raise mugs and yell something like, God save the king, in their best drunken pub voice. But no one does. Because no one really feels victorious. Not yet. Let's talk numbers. Rough estimates say the French lost between 6,000 and 10,000 men at Agincourt. The English, around 400. Some say less. That's a ratio so absurd, it sounds like someone miscounted with mittens on. The real cause of the imbalance: terrain, tactics, and longbows. Oh, yes, the longbow. Let's give it its moment, shall we? You glance to your left, where the archers are camped. They're laughing now, trading boots, swapping wild stories about arrows, splitting helmets and horses, slipping into somersaults. They're a rough bunch. Most aren't noble. Many have criminal records. One guy definitely has a pet rat named Jeffrey, and yes, Jeffrey has his own mini tunic. These men weren't respected before the battle. They were seen as expendable, cheap, replaceable. But today they were the wall, the thunderstorm, the hand of history. You remember watching them fire, the speed, the rhythm, the terrifying grace of it. English law had required training in archery since childhood. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a way of life. Pulling a longbow properly could require up to 100 pounds of draw weight. That's like bench pressing a small goat every time you want to shoot someone. They're skeletons, yes. We've dug them up, actually show deformation in their shoulders and spines. That's how dedicated these men were. You glance at a young archer nearby, wrapping his fingers in rawhide. His hands are bleeding, but he's grinning like he just got promoted tonight, which, of course, he won't. Archers don't get that still. They were the reason you're still breathing. Across the field, you see fires beginning to spark, torches lining the camp. Somewhere, someone is singing a slow, sad tune about rain and roasted meat. Two things this army never seems to get at the same time and in the darkness. Rumors start, the French will regroup. One man mutters, they'll come back tomorrow, not with the nobles dead, says another. Half the highborn of France are lying face first in that field. They'll raise another army, they always do. But no one raises a hand to silence the talk, because even the king knows it isn't over. And yet, something has shifted. You've seen it, felt it. Today wasn't just about arrows and mud. It was about power-shifting hands from knights in shining armor to commoners with sticks and string. It was the beginning of the end for the age of chivalry. Let's not get too poetic, though. There's still a lot of mud in your boots, and probably a beetle crawling down your collar. But something has changed. Even Henry seems different. You watch him walk alone for a moment, past his own tent, past the cheering guards, into the silence. Beyond, he's humming a hymn. Or maybe talking to God. Hard to tell. And for a second, he doesn't look like a king, just a man in a tin suit who's somehow still standing after watching thousands die. You finally sit down and lean against a barrel that smells like turnips and regret. The camp quiets, the stars appear, and the wind carries whispers from the battlefield. One archer nearby is counting arrows. Like they're coins, another is carving something into the haft of his bow. You close your eyes, not because you're at peace, but because your body has given up waiting for permission. And in that moment, on that blood-soaked patch of earth, you realize you've become part of a legend, one that's still being written. Dawn is slow to rise the next morning, as if even the sun is hesitant to look upon what remains. Neck stiff, like you've slept curled inside a pickle jar. The battlefield is quiet now. Too quiet. Even the crows seem cautious. But wait, you don't get far before the first strange sound reaches you. Laughter. A group of archers are gathered around a smoldering fire, roasting something suspiciously squirrel-shaped and retelling the battle like it was a tavern brawl. One's mimicking a French knight, Zot allure. Z mud, mon dignity. They collapse in hysterics. That's the thing about war. Sometimes the only way to survive it is to laugh in its face, preferably with a stick of roasted rodent in hand. But not everyone is joking. Further down the line, you see priests murmuring prayers over the dead. The stench is getting worse. The bodies haven't all been cleared. Some are still half buried in the mud, hands sticking up like questions no one wants to answer. Henry has called for a full field inspection, not just for honor, but for inventory. Medals, weapons, valuables, anything, useful or symbolic. You're given the extremely glamorous job of helping count French heraldic banners. That's right, today. You're on flag duty, you and a squire named Thomas, who smells faintly of ale and boiled cabbage trudge between fallen standards, noting the sigils of noble houses, golden lions, silver fleurs de lis, angry-looking boars. Most are caked in muck, handwritten, illuminated, a gift maybe, or a keepsake. You wonder if he'd read it the night before battle, thinking of someone waiting back home. Somehow it feels wrong to take it. That's the thing about these fields. They're full of stories, not just strategy and arrows, but love, fear, vanity, faith. You begin to understand why chroniclers later called this battle both a miracle and a tragedy. And speaking of chroniclers' guests, who arrives just before midday, the royal scribes, dressed in fur-lined cloaks and carrying scrolls like overgrown shopping lists, They start interviewing survivors. "What did you see?" they ask. "How far did the arrows fly?" More like touched by a mild concussion and a really bad night's sleep. But of course, no one says that aloud. One of the scribes pulls you aside. "Describe the moment of victory," he demands, quill poised dramatically. You consider your answer. Carefully then say, "It smelled like horse sweat, mud, and bad decisions." He doesn't write it down. Let's rewind a little. Remember that weird, narrow battlefield? They'd even camped nearby, certain that the English would surrender or die tired. But they misjudged Henry Ogan. He understood terrain like it was a second language. He saw the mud not as an inconvenience, but as a weapon. He saw the longbowmen not as support, but as the core of his strategy. And he played the odds like a gambler who already knew the cards. Historians are still debating whether the French commanders were arrogant, confused, or just unlucky. The Dukes of Orleans and Alençon had their own plans. Coordination? Laughable. Some even say there was petty rivalry between French factions that delayed their attack. Meanwhile, Henry's force, smaller, sicker, colder, moved like a single body. Wasted motion. Just grim determination and a common understanding. Either win today, Shakespeare sure did, but don't. Be fooled, no, one felt happy in that moment. Not really. They were relieved, exhausted, shocked, but happy. Not yet. Later that afternoon, a wagon train arrives from Calais. Supplies, finally. Bread, salted meat, dried fruit, and miraculous. The archers erupt in cheers like someone's just handed them the crown. Jewels wrapped in pork fat, you eat like a kingif. The king liked stale bread and onions and, for a few glorious minutes. The field almost feels like a feast almost, but then comes the hard part. Burials. You're handed a shovel and pointed toward a growing trench. The bodies are being moved in groups, now French and English alike. There's no time for ceremony. Just a quick prayer and the heavy thunk of earth. Here's an odd moment. One English knight insists on burying a French foe with his family crest intact. Says he was a cousin of sorts. By marriage, you watch as he gently places the banner over the body, then steps back with a nod, honor among enemies. A strange, beautiful thing. The sun begins to dip again, and as you stand at the edge of that field, sore and sunburned and somehow still alive, you start to understand why Agincourt matters. Not because it was glorious, but because but also in luck, desperation, and terrible weather. And you were there. You lean on your shovel and exhale. The wind picks up. The journey back to Calais begins under an indifferent sky, with heavy carts, sore feet, and the smell of 10,000 regrets packed neatly into every creaking axle. You're walking alongside the same men you stood shoulder to shoulder with. Just days ago, but now the mood is different. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Your boots squish with each step, still soaked through with Agincourt's finest mud, which has decided to cling to you like a weird badge of honor. Ahead of you, someone's humming a tune about St. Crispin's Day, it into a folk ballad that's equal parts patriotic and mildly inaccurate. That's how legends start, right? And just behind you, a wagon creaks beneath the weight of captured French armor, helmets with ornate crests, dented breastplates, even a few swords, with jewel-studded hilts all stacked like a mobile history exhibit with terrible ventilation. You're told this is only a fraction of what was collected. Spoils of war? Sure, but also evidence. Evidence of what happened, of how mud, longbows, and a hungry army led by a determined king flipped the story of European warfare on its head. But as you trudge forward, kicking the occasional stone, you start to realize something. Agincourt wasn't just about killing the enemy. It was about killing an era. The age of chivalry, the noble knight, charging into glory. Sword raised and visor polished dyed in the mud, alongside half the French nobility, and the new age, it's still being written by scribes on parchment, and by men like you, with dirt under your nails and blisters on your hands. A rider approaches from behind one of Henry's messengers. He's galloping at a decent pace, splattered with road dust and looking as if he hasn't blinked in 2 days. As he passes, he bellows, "Victory letters to London." You blink. Victory letters already. Sure enough, Henry has written detailed accounts of the battle, how his forces were outnumbered, how God was surely on his side, how his archers stood firm, Copies are being sent to Parliament, to the clergy, to nobles across Europe. It's the 15th century version of going viral. But here's where it gets weird. The numbers in those letters are ... generous. Some might say heavily edited. In one, Henry claims his forces were outnumbered, 61. In another, that only English died. Yeah, right? Even you, half asleep, and still smelling like smoked squirrel, know that number's optimistic. Still, the letters work. They boost morale. They rally the people. They frame Agincourt not just as a win, but as a divine win. The kind of thing chroniclers carve into stone tablets and sing about for centuries. You glance at Thomas, your cabist companion, and mutter, "Bet will be statues by Christmas." He doesn't answer. He's chewing something questionable and humming off-key. That night, you make camp on a hillside overlooking a small village. It's peaceful, hear no sounds of war, just the soft rustle of trees and the distant bark of a dog with questionable musical taste. Fires are lit. Bread is passed. Someone uncorks a jug of wine that tastes like spoiled vinegar but warms the soul just enough to matter. And then the tales begin. Archers claim they shot 3 men with 1 arrow. A squire swears he knocked down a knight with nothing but a cooking pot. One man insists he saw Henry himself tackle a French banner-bearer, unarmed, and wrestle him to the ground like some kind of royal bear. Historians are still debating. That, someone mutters, and the group bursts into laughter. But even in the exaggerations, you sense something else growing. Myth. Agincourt is no longer just a place. It's becoming a story, a symbol, a bedtime tale for future generations, where muddy boots and cramped bellies are swapped out for trumpets and destiny. You lie back against your pack, staring up at stars that look suspiciously unimpressed by recent events. And you wonder, what will they remember? The mud? The arrows? The king's cold resolve? Or the smaller moments, the book of poetry, the helmet carved with saints? The French soldier who whispered a prayer before vanishing under a horse? And what about you? You're no knight, no scribe, just a soldier who carried stakes, held your ground, and somehow made it out alive. You'll get no songs, no statues, but still, you were there, and that ... matters. A soft breeze rolls in. The fire crackles. Someone nearby snores like a dragon with sinus issues, and you drift, not fully asleep, not fully awake, somewhere between memory and dream. You imagine yourself, years from now, telling a child about that muddy October morning, about how the arrows sang, how the ground shook, how bravery looked less like shining armor and more like holding the line. In the rain, with a splintered bow and a prayer. And you'll say, "We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we didn't break." The fire pops. A spark dances upward. You smile, because maybe, just maybe, that's the part of the legend that'll last the longest. The ships at Calais rise from the mist like tired ghosts, their masts bobbing gently in the tide, sails half-furled like sighs. You've made it. After weeks of marching through wet fields and battle-scarred roads, the white cliffs of Dover are finally a real destination, again not a fantasy, whispered over cold campfires. But the harbor smells terrible, rotten fish, seaweed, and the unmistakable scent of hundreds of unbathed men waiting to board a cramped wooden tub. Welcome to the medieval travel experience. No complimentary peanuts, no extra legroom, and yes, someone probably has the plague. Just don't ask. You're herded aboard with the rest of your company. The deck is packed, shoulder to armor clanking, boots squelching, and one archer loudly insisting that Geoffrey the Rat has earned his own ticket. You find a space near the stern, lean against a barrel that smells like fermented sadness, and stare at the gray sea. It's calm. For now, the ship groans, the ropes creak, and with a lurch, you're on your way back to England. The wind bites harder than the French ever did. No one talks much at first. They just watch the coast fade into Fog France, the place where too many of their friends now rest under anonymous dirt. You wonder if the locals will ever dig them up, or if their bones will become part of the land. Anonymous ghosts under plow and root, but then the mood shifts. Someone starts singing. It's a nonsense song about a cook, a goat, and an unfortunate misunderstanding with a barrel of eels. No one knows all the words, but that's never stopped an Englishman before. Laughter spreads, jokes return. The smell still lingers, but the fear, that's slowly being replaced by something you almost forgot how to feel. Relief. You survived. Agincourt, now you just have to survive the celebration. And, oh, what a celebration it will be. Word of Henry's victory has reached England ahead of you. His letters, embellished or not, have done their work. The French were crushed. The English stood firm. The king, divinely guided, led a righteous cause through impossible odds. In London, bells are ringing, crowds are gathering. Poets are already scribbling about St. Crispin's Day, turning your freezing, muddy nightmare into literary fireworks. When you disembark, the streets are lined with people, waving cloth, tossing petals, shouting praises. You try to walk modestly, but let's be honest, you throw a few heroic glances into the crowd. One old woman yells, "God bless the bowmen," and you give her a wink like you were personally responsible for every arrow fired. And then there's the Royal Parade. Henry rides at the front, still young, still composed, but noticeably paler. Battle changes everyone. He's wearing ceremonial armor now, polished to a mirror shine. You can barely believe this is the same man who stood in the muck with you, soaked and sword drawn. But beneath the crown, you see it in his eyes. He hasn't forgotten. He doesn't wave like a king returning from a holiday. He nods, slowly, with the gravity of someone who knows that this glory came at a cost measured in blood, not gold. He speaks briefly at Westminster, gives thanks to God, honors the dead, promises peace, if France is wise enough to accept it. Historians are still debating how genuine those words were, but in that moment, the crowd believes him. And you're just trying not to faint from hunger. You find a tavern later that night. The archers rest stand, sit by the fire with Thomas and a few others. The smell of roasting meat makes you weep silently. You raise a mug and toast to the fallen, to survival, to Agincourt. And here's the part you weren't expecting. People want to hear your story. Not just the king's version, yours. They gather around your table like children at bedtime. They ask what it sounded like when the arrows flew, what it smelled like in the trenches. What it felt like to watch a knight drown in the mud, you tell them slowly, carefully, leaving out some of the worst bits, because this is a story that will be told for generations, not to glorify the killing, but to honor the endurance, the strategy, the sheer improbable resilience. You pause at one point and ask a boy in the crowd, "What do you think won the battle?" He shrugs. "God." You shake your head. "Mud." He laughs, thinking it's a joke. But you're not really joking. You remember how the field turned against the French? How the narrow space, the sloping terrain, the thick soil, all of it, became your greatest ally. You remember how archers didn't just fire from a distance. They stepped into the fray with mallets and knives when the lines collapsed. You remember how you were cold, sick, outnumbered, and still didn't run. That's what you tell them. And at the end of the night, as the fire crackles and the crowd fades, you lean back in your chair, look at the dark beams overhead, and finally, allow yourself to breathe. No more marching, no more mud, just sleep. And perhaps a dream not of war, but of peace. Because here's what you know now. Wars are remembered for their victories, but lived in their silences. And tonight, finally, silence is yours. So, here you are, dear listener. The battlefield has faded, the ships have docked, the laughter has dimmed, and the fire is slowly, gently dying down. You've walked through rain and blood and legend, stood beneath the arrows of Agincourt and listened to the silence that followed. You've seen kings rise and horses fall. You've watched mud-shaped destiny. You've learned that courage is often quieter than glory. And now, it's time to rest. Let the sound of the waves lull you into stillness. Let the wind outside your window carry the last echoes of longbows and victory. Let your breathing slow and your heartbeat settle. You were part of something big, something old, something that still whispers through history like a soft voice in the dark. But tonight, you don't need to carry that weight anymore. Close your eyes. You're home now. Stars above Agincourt have long gone dim, but new ones have risen, and beneath them, all is calm.